Well, hello YouTube, this is RL coming to you again from my channel, and welcome back to another installment of Retro Life Reviews. We're back. It's been a while, and just to remind you, we review video games from the 1980s and 1990s, and once again, here is my good friend CK, and co-host CK.
Welcome back, everyone.
Alright, so I'm excited to get started. I'm sure you are, CK. So we review games on a like, love, and loathe scale with graphics, music, sound effects, gameplay, controls, difficulty, fun factors, replay value, and story if applicable. So today we're going to be reviewing the classic game from the NES, Blades of Steel.
Tring.
It's as iconic as Contra. Those are the two classic openers from the NES era.
This game was created by Konami. It was released for North America in the arcades actually first in 1987 and then was ported to the Nintendo Entertainment System in 88. The game had a total of 8 teams. There were 4 Canadian teams: Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Edmonton. And then you've got the 4 American teams. So you had New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Minnesota. Did you know that there was a hockey game released before this by Sega a year earlier called Great Ice Hockey, which plays a lot like this? A bit suspicious, actually. Suspiciously similar. You should look into it.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious now.
Blades of Steel.
So what did you think of the graphics in Blades of Steel, CK?
I like the graphics in Blades of Steel. I actually like the fighting scene where they have the one-to-one. The graphics, I believe, from that really gives you some depth in the game. Outside of that, it's pretty neat. It doesn't feel stilted or like two-dimensional like a lot of other games from that era. You know, we talk about Contra a lot with regards to, you know, flat colors and such like that, and there's other games that are really flat per se, but they really tried to add depth to this in the graphics by having, you know, more than single tone. It has a two-tone, which gives it a bit of a a dimensional feel to it. For that, I give it a retro love.
Nice. I was not expecting that out of the gate. Awesome. Yeah. All right, so graphics for me. Yeah, you know, the graphics are, you know, pretty basic. I mean, they weren't the best of that era. I mean, it did what it needed to do. I mean, if you compare it to the arcade version, obviously it was limited. I'm surprised they never made a Super NES version of this because it did so well for the NES. Wouldn't it have been nice to have ported the actual real arcade version onto the Super? I'm very shocked they never did that. It didn't make any sense to me. But what are you going to do? Anyways, it's just the color schemes of the crowd animation wasn't as good. Well, I would say animation dots, but animated dots. I mean, at the time, that was actually quite dynamic for a sports game. The graphics that I remember that were the cool ones was the fighting and the shootouts when you had to take a slap shot on the goalies. There was no overtime. It would just go to the score on the goalie and just take a shot. Those looked really good. Those compared to the actual gameplay graphics, which were pretty basic. It did the job. Very similar to Double Dribble. Or maybe a little bit better. Double Dribble had the dunk animation. It would go into Blades still didn't have anything similar to that except for the, you know, the fighting and the slap shots on the goalie, which looked pretty cool. So I'm gonna give the graphics a double retro like for graphics. I'm being a little harsh, but I just feel like a love is too much. Gameplay graphics could have been a little better. But anyways, I digress. Moving on to music. What did you think of the music in Blades of Steel?
Iconic, period. The opening, intro music, the between periods music. I mean, there weren't many tracks to begin with, first of all, but of the ones that do, every time it comes on, I find myself bobbing to it. Dun, 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 dun. I mean, you were listening to that music even when the Zamboni was going through clearing the ice. You just bob into the music. So, I'm going to do the same and try not to have my sentimentality kind of override my judgment of the game. But at the end of the day, that's really, you know, it's our personal point of view. And I really enjoy enjoyed the music. For the limited amount of music that was in here, it worked for it. It was different, but it still felt like, arena hockey music. And for that, I give it a retro love.
Awesome. Yes, the music, even though it wasn't a lot of music, for every time there was music, it was epic.
Yes.
I don't remember a lot of the music back in that day, but Blades of Steel had that classic music. I kind of want to get it on my phone.
That'd be cool.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yes,
Gotta get to my review. The music is pretty epic. It's awesome music. There's not a lot of music, but what's in there is amazing music. It's definitely something that inspires you to score a goal in this game. So I'm going to give it a retro love for music.
Nice.
Yeah, so moving on to sound effects. What did you think of the sound effects in this game, CK?
The sound effects are, I don't want to use the word gimmicky, but they represent what they represent. Again, we kind of talked about this.
Shoot the puck, shoot the puck. I couldn't understand what the hell it was saying. Shoot the puck, press
shoot
the puck.
puck. Is it hit the pass?
Hit the pass, shoot the puck, shoot the puck. I don't know. It's very hissy, but it's still iconic.
Audio. It's still someone saying something, which you don't get from a lot of those games back then. They were usually like blips and bloops and stuff like that. And I think even with like when the puck hits the net or hits the boards, it makes that purring, that kind of boinging, kind of pringy sound that it does, like a springy sound that it does when they pass it and stuff. I mean, again, it's limited. We talked about this in many other games where the sound effects, as long as they don't really pull you out, they do what they do. They give you an audible response or confirmation that you've done this action. The slap shots, again, kind of sounds weird, but again, they had to digitize a stick hitting ice type of thing, which isn't a very common sound for most people anyway, unless you play hockey, like then you would know that. The punching sound, the dooku. The punching is cool. It's funny. It works for what it is. It didn't really take me out. It's not as annoying after you play it a bit. It really becomes the confirmation that you've done something. When you hit that pass, or when you take that slap shot, or when the goalie stops it, or when you're punching a guy, including the skates on ice, that everywhere. Every time you move the character, it's that sound, but it doesn't become grinding, which I thought was interesting and amazing, kind of, because if you think about sounds like that happen all the time in a game, if you make those sounds irritating, kind of gets on your nerves. That crunching sound of the blade hitting the ice, and that carving sound of when you're stopping, or when you're banking, or whatever the case may be, it just becomes background noise. You know it's there, and you don't really pay attention to it, and it feels like the same in this game. If you really want to listen to it, you're like, man, all you're hearing is a skating sound, but ultimately it is a normal sound. It's so normal that it's almost like disappears in it. So it really works for the game. I give the sound effects a retro double like.
Cool.
They really work for the game.
They do. Anyway, so my turn. Sound effects. They get the job done. There's a lot of I just remember playing it with my friend who I always would beat him like 10-1, 10-2. I think he scored very few goals. I mean, he was pissed. I rubbed it in back then. I would rub it in. Listening to this, he'll be pissed off, I'm sure.
I'm pretty sure.
But there was always like the sound effects back then. We were like, what the hell are they saying? It was trying to decipher like, shoot the puck, pass the puck, hit the post. Those things really, I say annoyed me, but it was definitely very funny because you just couldn't understand it. It was so... I feel they could have used it at the time when they scored. Could have said they score or something, because that doesn't happen often. But every time you pass the puck, it'll be like, pass the puck, pass the. I'm pretty sure it said pass the puck. It's like the worst thing you could possibly use because you don't understand what the hell they're saying, and you're gonna hear it all the time because you pass the puck all the freaking time in this game. That's all you do is pass the puck, so you're gonna hear it all the time. It's just fine. But if it was more audible and you could understand it'd be fine. I guess they were trying to do commentary, but because it's so badly executed, because of the limitation of the Nintendo, maybe they should have just tweaked it a little bit or take it out. The skating sounds fine, the puck hitting the board sounds fine, and you hit the player, you hear grunting, like those are fine, but that sound effect with when you hear it pass the puck was brutal. So because I was annoyed by that growing up, I'm gonna give the sound effects a retro like.
All right. I thought you were going to be a little harsher on that.
I was toying with half-like, but because there's some iconic sounds in it, so I could forgive it for the really bad audio cues.
Gotcha.
But anyways, moving on to gameplay. What did you think of the gameplay in Blades of Steel?
I like the gameplay in Blades of Steel. The gameplay was fun. The gaps in between were neat with the little kind of Konami shooter thing. I think it was during the second intermission where you got to play the little Konami game. It was a little Easter egg that they threw in there for everyone to play. It was pretty neat. And the players moved fast. They were responsive. I thought that was neat. You know, they didn't feel stilted. It didn't feel really choppy. One thing about, I guess, the gameplay for me that kind of turned me off, and it will affect the score, is the goalie. I never expected it to be... I never wanted it to be a player, but I wanted it to be a player. But the player and the goalie at the same time, because they had to find a way to synchronize it. It's so weird, because as soon as anyone gets over the blue line on in your zone, you literally switch to goalie, and at that point your defense basically becomes just floating pylons. So for me it was that was the most frustrating part. Now I love scoring on my opponent, because then I would use that to their advantage, obviously, pass and then shoot from across the sides and work the corners and dip around the net and do wraparounds. But that was the one thing that kind of pulled me out, and I give the game a retro like for that reason. Now, it could have been more. I really love the game, but that part for that specific thing in the gameplay really pulled it back. So
that's hilarious, because that's the one thing I enjoyed about the game, controlling the goalie. I'm a goalie, and I'm not surprised, because it was confusing for a lot of people when you're controlling the players and all of a sudden you can't control your defense. He's like, what's going on? You have to control your goalie. But I got used to it. I used to love playing the goalie, just stoning, because I was always good at the goalie. One of the things when I moved on to NHL hockey I didn't like was it was hard to control the goalie, and I was like, I had to rely on the goaltending being half-ass, and it was like, oh shit, I could have made that save, or the goalie was terrible in the beginning of NHL hockey, depending on the team, of course. So I loved controlling the goalie, and I'd always like stone my friend in the goaltending department, because of the arrow, and you always knew where you just go where the arrow was. And I loved the arrow. If it wasn't for the arrow thing, I think I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. But that arrow was so clever.
Yeah, so, it was a clever element.
Yeah, it was a clever. It felt like a foosball. Like you controlled everything on the ice practically, except for the defense when you're controlling the goalie, because you can't control both. But I'd rather control the goalie than the defense, because to be honest, I don't like the goaltending for that era. Probably would have been very weak and give up goals that I don't think I would have wanted to give up. So if you give up a goal, it's your fault. I love the goaltending. So for gameplay, for me, I'm gonna give it a double retro love, because I just love that goaltending and being in full control of this game. Alright, so moving on to controls. What did you think of the controls in this game, CK?
The controls I enjoyed. Again, outside of the goalie and the gameplay fact, but under the control in this particular category, control is great for the game. Again, the game moves quick enough that you don't feel it stilted. Directing your passes, which is one important thing that a lot of games at that time, some of them, really didn't have, especially the sports games. It was like the nearest player type thing, as opposed to being able to direct your pass, to someone. You point in the general direction, you hit the pass button, he hits the pass. So when you got in and you're able to take slap shots and moving your character around, you can swirl the D-pad, and your character would swirl in a tight circle. And I'm like, that's nice. It didn't feel jittery. It didn't feel blocky. And, being able to move the goalie up and down and know that you have that smooth control, and when the goalie had the puck and he can pass it back out, again, you had the control. It was great. Right. It really did work for the game. And, the little fight element where you kind of punch high, punch low, block type thing, that's all part of the control too. And I grade it. It's part of the category. I think it's great. And everything about this game feels tight. I really did enjoy it. It's one of the better hockey games. I mean, there were ones that came out later in the 90s that still didn't feel like ice hockey did. Even though ice hockey was very limited in what it presented, it did its best at a side scroll, I guess a side panning hockey game, where a lot of sports games ended up being kind of up and down top view, where this one was a side view. And for that, because of its tightness and because of the goalie control and because of being able to hit the passes and be able to shoot, obviously generally where the arrow is, because that's how they had to build the mechanic in, I give it a retro love.
Yes, I agree with you a lot of what you said, but you just contradicted yourself when you said goalie control, which you didn't like the goalie control. You were mentioning.
I didn't like
before.
the goalie control in the gameplay factor, but being able to control the goalie in there is actually
Yes.
a good. It's a good element.
Yeah.
It's just not
I think
a factor I wanted to have in the game. That's all.
They should have maybe had been able to turn it on and off, but
In the options,
I guess
pop in,
they
turn
should have
it
been an
on.
option. For me, controls, I found the controls to be effective. They were very simple, not complicated at all. The only reason I'm thinking of giving it a lower score than I would with the gameplay is because of the switching to the goaltending in your zone with your defensemen makes it a little bit tricky for people who don't, maybe are beginners,
Right.
So that's a bit awkward there. For me, I liked it, but there were times where I felt sometimes the passing would be, you get intercepted quite often, and it was hard to really direct the pass where you wanted to direct the pass, and it would just pass it to the nearest player. Sometimes if you wanted to pass it to another player, you couldn't do so. So it was very limited in that regard. I feel, obviously it's a very early generation 8-bit game, so there wasn't, complex passing mechanics. But it would have been nice to sometimes have a directional button to pass it to another player instead of the closest one to you. And there were a lot of times where that affected the game, and I would give it away a lot of times. So there were some limitations, and it's the closest game to feel like foosball, which I really like, because that's, you got complete control of. So I'm gonna give it a retro double like.
Okay.
I was tempting to put it a love. I'm going to stick with the double like for this one because of the limitations in the passing, which I felt was frustrating a little bit for me at the time.
Right.
All right, so moving on to difficulty. What did you think of the difficulty in this game, CK?
It's not so difficult when you master the goalie. And I think you've come to realize that that part of the game is that at the end of the day, when you truly master the goalie and you can shut down your opponent, all it takes is for you to score. And really, even when you play tournament and you play against the computer, it's the same idea. If you can shut them down with your goalie, ultimately at the end of the game, that to me is the difficulty in it. There's no major learning curve. I think it really comes down to how much control you have in the game. And for a hockey game, again, going back to the actual gameplay and control, it does help soften the difficulty of this game in general. And like most games where they're sports games, as you make your way through the season or as you make your way through the tournament or the round robin, whatever the case may be, things get harder as you play different teams. Now there's only 8 teams in this game, so it's not like you're playing a ton of games. So outside of that, with regards to difficulty control, like in the game, I've never adjusted it. I've always kind of played it as is, because I think it's just a matter of getting better at controlling your character, shooting when necessary, not getting hit 3 times by your opponent. If you get hit tapped twice, pass that puck, because you're either going down or you're going to get into a fight. And with the computer, it makes it a bit tougher as you make your way further up the ranking. So that being said, difficulty gets a retro like. That's what it gets from me.
Awesome. We are so different in our scoring in this game. All our scores are never completely the same. Obviously, we have different opinions, but this one's the complete opposite. So for difficulty for me, I love that it's scaling. There is an easy, medium, and hard. I used to always play it on easy or medium. I never played it on hard. I really love the scoring in this game. As much as I loved the goaltending, I love scoring because you'd always, just score where the arrow goes, right? If you just time it right and you know where that arrow is moving, you usually are going to put it in the net. And that's what I loved about that arrow, is like it helps us being a goalie and it helps scoring. And other games, NHL hockey didn't have that. It was harder to score. Well, what am I doing wrong? Whereas Blades of Steel, okay, I didn't score because I didn't wait to the arrow to go the right way, Do better next time and time it better. So there was way more control. If you had the skill, you could always figure out how to score where you needed it. Right. So I always found it fun. So if you made a mistake, you didn't score, it's like, it wasn't really, you don't know what you're doing. It's like, okay, it's not the computer's fault, but it's my fault. I could actually do better. So I really like the difficulty in this game because you can adjust it, and it's even at harder levels, you still could put that puck in the net, where other games, you just like just felt like it couldn't score, and it's just annoying when you can't score at a you don't want it to be at will, but you want to be able to score and know what you're doing and know how to score. For me, the difficulty, I'm going to give it a retro love for difficulty. So moving on to fun factor. What did you think of the fun factor in this game?
The fun factor is high, though frustrating at times for certain things I've obviously outlined, and wonderful for other things that I've obviously outlined. I really enjoyed the game. The gameplay makes it good. The music was fun. Controls were tight. The difficulty was scaling. Everything about it is kind of like good to great. And also because it's part of my childhood, and I'm sorry, I'm going to let nostalgia override this one a little bit.
Let it override. Let it
let it wash over me, yes.
We're
yes,
a retro channel. There is definitely going to be nostalgia in our reviews. We just can't hide that. So it's just trying to control it so it's not a love fest every single game we review.
Yeah, the fun factor gets a retro double love for me because I can always go back to this game and play it and enjoy it. Fun factor gets a retro double love for me.
Nice. So fun factor for me, yeah, everything you said, I'm going to agree. It's a very fun game. This game, nostalgia goggles aside, obviously there's nostalgia. Most people who play this game now, kids today, would probably be like, what the hell is this crap? It's garbage looking, but it's so much fun. I could pick it up and play it and have a blast even against a computer. Obviously it's more fun playing against a friend. It is a very, very fun game because you control every aspect of the game. I said I love the goaltending, controlling the goaltending, and the arrow makes it so much fun. If you're skilled enough as a goalie or in this game and you enjoy that element, it really was a lot of fun because it wasn't hard to be a goalie and to score goals. You could do it almost at will, not always, depending on the level of the play, obviously.
That's right, as good as you were, right.
Yes, and the fighting, but it wasn't hard to the point where you're playing some games like Brett Hall hockey where you literally did not know how to fucking score. It was impossible to score. Yeah, this game is just enjoyable. It's like playing a foosball, and who doesn't like playing foosball? It's digital foosball, and it's so enjoyable. I could pick it up, play it now, and I had just as much fun now as I did back then.
I know,
of course,
right?
Yeah, I love the modern hockey games, NHL hockey. I still love those games. And people think, oh, I'm a retro guy, but I love graphics too. I love the graphics in NHL hockey. I can't wait to see what it looks like on the PS5. But this game isn't about the graphics, it's about gameplay, and the gameplay is still, in my opinion, way better than any of the modern games because you're in it. You feel like you're in it. You're controlling everything, and I love that. So that alone, and I think you know where I'm going with this. It's a retro double love.
Definitely.
Awesome. Yeah, no, the fun factor is through the roof. It's such a fun game. But some of those sports games are so hard to play, but not Blades of Steel. That game is an amazingly fun game, and it's a double retro love. Anyway, so moving on to replay value. That's our new category we added. So what did you think of the replay value in Blades of Steel, CK?
Replay, my friend. That's all it's about. Get better and challenge yourself. I think this game has very, very high potential in the replay value scene, and I think most sports games do because anyone who plays sports games and enjoys sports games for the sake of playing sports in general always want to progress and get better. Not to say it's a practical skill, but it's definitely an entertainment value. And unlike some other kind of platformers or shooters, whatever the case may be from this era, mid to late 80s going into early 90s, this definitely has a high replay value. 1, it's also a great game for me, nostalgia wise. 2, and quite frankly, it's one of the few games that you can pick up and just play with somebody and have a good time. It doesn't become too serious because it isn't hyper technical, and you just want to, like you said, you play the game to beat your friend. Literally, that's your enjoyment came from basically besting him in this game. But you enjoyed the game for what it was because it provided you the tools to do that, and simple tools. For that reason, it gets a retro double love from me.
That's cool. The replay value for me, well, first off, there is no replays in this game. Back then they didn't have any instant replay. You know,
there was none of that.
Obviously, that's not the point of replay value. It's not about instant replay, but it's kind of a funny way to put it in this category. The replays, there were no replays, and I always remember thinking to myself, I wish there was replays, instant replays and stuff. The replay value is still very high. It was an enjoyable game to pick up. It's is something that I just feel it wasn't as high when you're playing against a computer, and that's maybe the reason why I'm going to give it a lower score than you.
Yes.
If you didn't have your friend over, it wasn't as fun. I still feel it's fun playing against a computer, but at the time I felt replay value at the time it wasn't as high as some of the other Nintendo games that I had. That shouldn't hinder a score, but I gotta take into account that when you play a game, you're either playing it by yourself or with a friend. So I gotta factor that in. I mean, a lot of games, Contra, Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I mean, those are games that Mike Tyson's Punch you can't play against a friend, but Contra you can. But I felt those games were better by yourself, because when you played Contra with a friend, it was very hard. It was confusing because you got too many things on the screen. And of course, Mike Tyson's Punch Out was, that was through the roof. So for me, I'm going to give the replay value a retro love, not a double love. I'm going to give it a love, and that's fair. So replay value, our new category for me, is a love. You are a double love. Alright, so moving on to the influence score. So what did you think Blades of Steel's influence was on the gaming market, CK?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I'm going to give it a 1 on our scale of 0 to 2 type of thing, because I don't think it had no influence, but it definitely set a bar for games coming out in the future. And I think it set an example that hockey games can work. So it's hard. Like I said, I'm going to give it a 1. Directly, Blades of Steel I don't think had a massive influence for gaming in general.
I would say Blades of Steel, I would give it a 1. I don't want to give it a 0 because it had some, but I don't think it would be like a 2 on the scale, because I would think NHL hockey would have been something like a 2 I would give, because it had way more influence. But yeah, 1. I think a 1 is fair. Alright, so this is the portion of review where we flip a coin to decide who gets to choose the next 2 games for you guys to vote on. So heads is high as always. And I believe I flipped last.
So
it's your turn.
Heads are high. Here we go. Heads.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I win a flip? What the hell? What kind of bizarro world is this? Alright. So my first pick is going to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist for the Sega Genesis. And the second game will be also for the Sega Genesis. That's an interesting twist. Space Harrier for the Sega Genesis. So we got 2 Sega Genesis for you guys to choose. So leave a comment below and let us know which game you want us to review next on Retro Life Reviews. So this was a fun review. Blades of Steel, our first sports game in our series of reviews. And hopefully we'll have some more sports games in the future, because there's lots of great sports games.
Lots.
On many platforms. Thanks for doing this with me, CK.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me again, as we always will be reviewing retro games with our fantastic retro goggles.
I think we're doing a decent job, because we're not loving every little game we play. On that note, we'll have more Retro Life reviews in the weeks, months, and years to come. Bye for now.
Ciao, folks.
No, it sounds like I'm trying to do da-da-da-da-da, but I'm not. I'm trying to do the actual music. Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm going to have to chop all that out.
As you do most times. So.
Anyways, the music is